name is Al Guyant. I think I know about at least half of you, and I'm a member of the Sun Prairie Action Resource Coalition. I got that right. Normally I say Sun Prairie Resource Action Coalition, but same difference. SPARC, and SPARC has set this up so that we can have a conversation with Russ Feingold and some other folks here. We also have Nick Zweifel, a Progressive County Board member, who is here with us, going to have a couple of words. State Representative Gary Hebl is here, and then we have State Representative Mark Pokin, who's obviously going to be our successful candidate for Congress shortly. And then we also have Stephanie Feld and Steve Meyer back in the corner. These are for the one or two people in the room that don't know them. I should explain that they are running the Obama for America office at 1632 Main Street, putting in ungodly hours that only young people can do, and doing it very well and cheerfully. I'm going to introduce Heather Dubois-Bournon. Do I say that right? Close enough?
Yes, it's close enough.
Close enough. Anyway, she's going to give us a little bit of background on SPARC and what we're up to, and then she will make an introduction after that. Thank you.
Thanks, Al. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming. Thanks, Al, for going through all the trouble of taking care of all the details for this event. And thank you, Gary, for your help in getting Senator Feingold to come visit. But mainly, thank you, Sun Prairie, for showing up and proving once again that when progressives have the chance, they get together, and how in this community. So Al asked me to say a little bit about what SPARC is and how we got started, and I think I see a lot of familiar faces here, so many of you are probably already on our email list, but maybe you don't know how our ball got rolling, and so I'm going to say a little bit about that. First of all, it all has to do with the big dropping of the bomb, right? Last December 2011, at which time I didn't know anyone in this room except Gary, but he didn't know me, right? And I was outraged, and as many of us were, and I think one of the immediate things that we did at that time was realize that there actually wasn't a progressive network for us here locally, and that we needed to create one fast to do something locally to offset the potential damages done by the helpful tools the governor had given us to restructure our community infrastructures. So we started to come together and ask around and look around, and I found out through my son's school that Julie Schwellenbach here was organizing some people who she had already met with a couple of times. And things just really snowballed, and we started getting together and meeting once a week, and we met once a week up until the recall, and we are the team that organized the local recall effort, where we... Thank you. You know, within a matter of months, grown a list of over 400 active volunteers. That's the number of people in Sun Prairie who stood in the cold and collected signatures and really did the work of making that recall happen. And if you are following the results, landslide victory for Team Recall here in Sun Prairie. I mean, we may have lost the larger battle, but we certainly won locally. So, post-recall, we really focused our attention on doing what we can to try to bring the community together under the umbrella of issues that matter to all of us, and to identify concerns that we share, and to communicate and get together and have fun and do social things, and really just try to combat this misperception that we live in a conservative community, because we don't. I mean, the voting history could not be more clear, and I think it's time for us to embrace our progressive identity, and we're starting to do that. So that's good to see, and people are coming together. Everyone is welcome to attend our meetings. We meet once a week, or once or twice a month usually, and we have social events maybe once a month or every 2 months. And you can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. What is it, Nick? Prairie Action at Twitter, on Twitter. We've got a web page where we have a regular newsletter of local events and events nearby in Madison that are of interest to progressives. And we just encourage all of you to get involved and not to be intimidated by the fact that some of us already know each other, because we want to know everyone here. And we hope that you'll join us and get involved, and thanks for coming out today.
All right, so it is my honor, and I had the opportunity to work with this great person close enough years ago that he's just as good close up as he is far away. So Senator Russ Feingold, would you please come down and thank us?
It's great to be introduced by my friend Al Guyant. He didn't have a chance to tell you because the time is tight, but when I first ran for the Wisconsin State Senate, my first race, Charlie remembers it, 1982, I ran against a good guy in the primary who was favored, Scott Hassett, who later became head of the DNR. And I knocked on every door on the north side of Madison. And the warmest greeting I got was from the Guyant family. And he's been with me every day for these whole 30 years. So it's good to be here in Sun Prairie. Thank you for creating this progressive organization. And I want to especially thank Gary Hebl for inviting me out here. You're lucky to have a representative like Gary who is interested genuinely in creating jobs, but standing with working people. Lord knows we need people like Gary to stand up to this governor who has shown he's willing to do absolutely anything. And thank you for what you did throughout that period. Now they had to shorten up the early voting because they were afraid of it, and that's apparently by some indications will not be a big problem, even though it's unfortunate they did that. There's some indications from the State Elections Board that we'll still get the same number of people. But I still consider it an outrage, because I think the early voting is one of the coolest things I've ever seen instituted in this state, which already had, at least before, the most liberal and progressive voting laws in the United States. So this is going to be a continuing battle. But in the near term, we've got to win these elections coming up. I was surprised that I'd say that, but I'll tell you what really sticks in my craw. And if you haven't heard the story about what these guys did on January 20th, 2009, to promise themselves that they try to destroy the Obama presidency, you owe it to yourself to read up on it. You know, some of you know that have had the fun of being out in Washington when one of our guys wins, you get to go to the inaugural parties and stuff. Actually, in some ways they sound like more fun than they really are, because you wait for about 6 hours, the president shows up for 10 minutes. And, but it's nice to win. But if you lose, and I was there a couple of times when we lost with Bush, you don't get invited to parties. You go to the swearing in, which is great, and then you go out to dinner, and that's it. And you go home. You're ready to work the next day. Well, you know, I had a good seat in those days for the swearing in, and I could see down the mall 1 million people. At least that's what I'm told the estimates were. The largest crowd in American history. And it appeared that everybody in the country understood the history of the moment and was, you know, positive about it, even though they may have disagreed or wanted to reserve the right to disagree. There was this sense that this new fascinating person would be given a chance to govern, to get a honeymoon. We even gave George Bush a honeymoon when he didn't win the election. You know? And so this is a very odd thing. What happened was a group of these fellows out there on the Republican side did go out to dinner together at the Palms, which is a restaurant that was cynically created by the two leading lobbyists in Washington, one Republican and one Democrat, to sort of, you know, pay tribute to lobbying. So it's like this state place called the Palms. So who went there to dinner? Newt Gingrich, Eric Cantor, and your local buddy Paul Ryan. And they made a secret oath. They were so concerned that this new man had so much support that it could lead to Democratic strength for many, many years to come. They made an oath that they would make sure he got nowhere, that this term would be a disaster. And that was their goal, instead of trying to help. I mean, this is at a time when we have our worst economic situation since the Depression and incredibly challenging international things. This is what these allegedly patriotic Americans did. They did just the opposite. They did something that would completely destroy our system of government, if that's the attitude that you take every time somebody gets elected. So that's how they kicked it off. And that was their goal. And a few months later, Jim DeMint, South Carolina, confirmed it when he publicly said that they wanted to make health care the president's Waterloo. You know, instead of being the new president, he's Napoleon. You know, this was an outrage. But you know, the president didn't let it deter him. And the fact is, Barack Obama accomplished something that presidents had been trying to do for 70 years. He passed health care, guaranteeing health care for all Americans. This was like the holy grail. And they did it not only without their help, but with their absolutely willing distortion or outright lies about what was contained in the legislation, which is actually too moderate of a bill for my taste. But it has some really darn good things in it, which we all know we long fought for, all the way from a patient's bill of rights to protecting people with pre-existing conditions to letting kids stay on their parents' insurance till they're 26. This was truly progressive legislation in the sense of moving our country forward and addressing a problem that all people in the country share. The president also was very courageous in taking on the banking industry and changing student loans. This is not some minor thing. And pushing for Pell Grants. This is not a minor thing. For those of us that have had any association with people that have been in college in the last few years, it's a whole different deal than when at least my generation was in places like Janesville Craig High School. Nobody ever said to me, I never heard anybody say anything about whether they could afford college. If you got into a good college, there were resources there. You didn't end up with $50,000 to $100,000 in debt. So this is a terrible thing that only things like Pell Grants and loans can fix. The president took money from a middleman situation with banks and used it to improve that situation. And yes, this president, and I know many of us here came up through the whole anti-war tradition in this state, this president, even though it was slower than I wanted, he got us out of Iraq. Of course, Mitt Romney doesn't know whether he wants us back in or not because it changes every couple of minutes. You know, the things that the Republicans denigrate. The president's had 31 straight months of positive job growth. And he's the first to say that isn't good enough, but you know what, that actually sounds pretty good to me. 31 straight months. After he came in with 700,000 jobs being lost in 1 month, to which my successor, Ron Johnson, says, you know, the economy was not in free fall in early 2009. It's like, really? Okay, what would a free fall look like? And then in terms of the debt, the phoniness of the other side. The president has put forth for some time a specific plan to reduce the federal deficit and the debt. And he doesn't wall off things like upper income people from participating. Romney's got a solution. It's a $5 trillion tax cut for the wealthy. It's not going to cost you a dime, right? He's just going to find a bunch of loopholes. It's completely baloney. But Ryan, of course, before he knew he was going to be vice president, actually laid out his plan and the math of his plan. Look at Paul Krugman's articles about this. The Ryan plan, in the first 10 years of his plan, actually does cut $1 trillion in spending. Things like food stamps and Pell Grants. But he also gives an additional $4 trillion in tax cuts for the wealthy. Now, he and I went to the same high school, Janesville Craig, but we must have had different math teachers. Because that moves us in the wrong direction, obviously. Most importantly, though, even though we care about so many of these issues, and we heard the president clean his clock on the international issues, I mean, that whole discussion about Iran was incredible. Look what the president's achieved. He's laid out a tough stand with regard to Iran. He said, we're not going to let them become a nuclear power. That's not what he's led with. He's effectively worked to create sanctions. And these sanctions are having effect on Iran. The rial is down 50%. And that's why they're willing to talk. This is a far better approach than the idea of trying to invade this country, which would be an extremely difficult, if almost possibly in some ways almost impossible task to try to deal with that situation, anything other than an enormous tragedy for everybody involved. So, you know, Romney looked like he was just trying to repeat what the president said. But most important, in my view, is related to an issue that I've never had a chance to talk about in my career: money and politics. I just never had a chance. The Citizens United decision was one of the worst decisions in the history of our country. I spent a lot of time talking about it, and I've made the point that, you know, the average citizen doesn't run around comparing notes about Supreme Court decisions like Patrick. You don't hear people mentioning case names a lot. Dred Scott, Brown versus Board, Roe v. Wade, Bush v. Gore. And I would say Citizens United is one of those handful in my lifetime that people really know. They don't know everything about it, but they do know that something's rotten. And what's rotten is that the United States Supreme Court in a 5-4 vote overturned 100 years of the wisdom of the American people, fought for by Bob La Follette, signed by Teddy Roosevelt, saying that corporations shouldn't be able to use their treasuries to destroy our electoral process. But that's exactly what's happened. When people say, well, you know, it's always like this, money in politics. No, this has not been this way since the Gilded Age. But now we have the Gilded Age on steroids. Now, the president isn't perfect on this, and I've been public about this as his co-chair of his campaign, one of his co-chairs. But this is the president who stood at the State of the Union after the decision, looked straight at the members of the Supreme Court and said, you were wrong. What you did was wrong. So my guess is, if he comes back as our president for 4 more years, which I believe he will, that he'll take this on. He will fight for disclosure legislation and other reforms, but most importantly, he's the one that gets to choose the justices. And as hard as we may fight for other alternatives, such as a constitutional amendment, the best way to get this done is to have one vote switch. And you know what? I think I'd rather have Obama appointing the justices than Romney on this point. What about you? What is more important for women's rights, for civil liberties, for all the issues, including money in politics, than the Supreme Court? So I promised I would make sure other people, such as our next congressman, will get a chance to talk, who I think the world of. I am thrilled that Mark Pocan is going to be my congressman. Mark is a delightful guy who, I've rarely seen anybody combine the ability to be a progressive and be principled, but also be so good with working with colleagues and working within the legislature. He has a knack for it. He's a natural. And you need to do that when there's 435. He's the kind of guy that's going to make his mark right away, and this district deserves a great congressman, and I know we're going to get one to replace the person who's going to be our next senator, Tammy Baldwin. Sad thing for Tommy is if he'd kept his mouth shut for the last 2 months, not done some of this horrible stuff that he did on 9/11 and all this stuff, maybe people would have thought about the old Tommy and said, well, you know, let's give him a chance. But this has been an embarrassment, that somebody would use these kind of tactics against a person who's been a wonderful congressperson, but also somebody who works her heart out for working people, for farmers, for veterans. And the one thing you can't say against Tammy is she's a people person. And the idea that she would be against these folks just doesn't fly. So I'm excited about all that. But in the end, I'm going to conclude by doing what Al asked me to do, which is to go back to that original state senate race. And you poor people may have heard me say this story before, but this is the time of year when I tell the story. It's kind of like an annual holiday story. It's an election story. And it took place, you know, right around here. And it has to do with the fact that even though things are looking a little better the last couple of days, please don't let down your guard. I said at the time that Obama had his lousy first debate performance, maybe it's a good thing. Maybe it was a wake-up call, because things looked a little too easy there. Don't fall back into this now. Don't fall back into this, because there could be undercurrents going on that will require us to get every single vote out, and we cannot take Wisconsin for granted. And so take advantage of the early voting. Please realize that a place like Sun Prairie could be the difference. And the story simply is, as some of you already know, that when I ran for the state senate in 1982, I knocked on 15,000 doors to run against an 83-year-old incumbent. I was 29 and he was 83. Nicer man, from a conservative, but a pleasant guy named Cy Bidwell, Everett Bidwell. And he didn't campaign real hard. He figured he had it made, and I was out there knocking on all the doors. But in the end, I conceded defeat by 19 votes at 4 o'clock in the morning out in Middleton. But they had 3 weeks of recounts, and it was all hand ballot except for just the city of Middleton. And at the end of the day, I won the election with 31 votes out of 47,000. If I hadn't knocked on doors in the rain, I wouldn't have the pleasure of being at that table in Portage where they were counting the votes, and Tim Cullen and I, and Democrats were on our one side, and a woman named Susan Engelleiter, who used to be a state senator, was on the other, and there was a very cranky guy on the other side who was really mad about the way it was going. He was an assemblyman named Tommy Thompson. And that gave us the majority in the Wisconsin State Senate. So Al, thank you. Gary, thank you. Mark, everybody. It is a pleasure to be here. And let's, we got 2 weeks left in us, right? Let's do it.
Yeah.
First, I'd like to thank SPARC for holding this event. It's not every day you get some super-powered politician progressives to come to your town hall and all in one night. So can we just give a round of applause to SPARC? Well, on November 6th, it's very important that we re-elect President Obama. But we also have to pay attention to some of our local races.
How you been?
Last spring, after all the turmoil in our state sort of got turned upside down, I decided to run in Sun Prairie for our county board seat. It was a brand new seat through redistricting of the county. There was one guy running, he was running unopposed. We didn't feel that he was going to express the values that Sun Prairie has, so I ran. Now, I'm not a politician, I'm just a high school math teacher at DeForest, and I live here in Sun Prairie. But at the end of the day, my wife and I sat down and we said, you know, this is why our state is turned upside down. Our state is turned upside down because people stopped paying attention. We stopped paying attention to what's happening right here in our own community. And people come in, they get elected, nobody runs against them, there's no debate, there's no exchange of ideas, there's no choice. And we got stuck in a rock and a hard place in our state and locally. So I decided to run. I've never done it before. I didn't know anybody, I didn't have a campaign manager, I needed 50 signatures, so I looked for recall Walker signs, and my wife and I knocked on the doors, and I got over 50 signatures in one night. And next thing I know, I'm running for county board. But I didn't have anything. I just would go out after school every single night and knock on doors. I'd pick a different neighborhood. We finally picked up some wings, and I got a campaign manager. We got a little bit more organized, and we won. And you know, what a great day. What a great day. I don't expect everybody to run out and run for office like I did. And I'm sure my wife would tell you not to do it.
A couple of you, please.
But I am here to tell you that we get frustrated with government and we think that you know, they go away and they don't really represent us and it doesn't matter. And I'm here to tell you that it does. You know, I work really hard. The Dane County Board is in budget season right now, and I'm inviting all of you to pay attention to what's going on because it affects Sun Prairie. And if you have any questions, please give me a call. But we also have Mark Pocan running for Congress. We need to make sure that he gets elected on November 6th. And first and foremost, we have our local, Gary Hebl, running for State Assembly. And let me tell you something. Gary, I reached out to Gary when I ran, and he took me under his wing. He gave me advice. He wrote me a letter of endorsement, and he helped me out immensely. Here's a guy who is a lifelong Sun Prairie resident. He grew up here. He knows what this city is about. He knows how this city has grown. He knows where this city needs to be. He understands, unlike his opponent, that coming back from the economic troubles that our country and our county and our state and Sun Prairie's had is not an easy fix. It has to do with education. It has to do with making sure our working families are taken care of. He knows that there's a big picture that we have to look at. Healthcare, education, educated workforce, jobs coming back, all kinds of jobs. And he knows how to put that together. He knows because he's lived here his whole life. He knows how this city has grown. And he's also a business leader in our town. So remember on November 6th, President Obama is important, so cast your ballot for him. But we need to make sure that Gary Hebl is representing the city of Sun Prairie and the 46th district for state assembly on November 6th. So please get out and vote early too, by the way, right? You can vote early? And without further ado, I'm not going to keep building him up because he can build himself up. So.
Let's give him a big hand for that. Last night I spent 2.5 hours just across in the studio for Kids 4 in a debate with my opponent. And it's amazing how well she was trained in the ALEC ideas. It's scary. So what's going on here is not something that's just happenstance. There's some real things underneath the surface that are going on that are really endangering our democracy. And we saw this last 2 years, what we saw with the attack, the vilification of teachers and state workers, something that just devastates my heart to see. We allow our children, we give our children our most important commodity to teachers. We entrust them to educate our students, our kids, to be the best that they can be. The number one thing that we do in the legislature, the most important thing we do, is to provide a quality education for our children. That is our future. And so I've been fighting for that. You in this room know how important that education is. I mean, Sun Prairie, it's kind of funny, I'm preaching to the choir in several ways. Most of you have voted. How many have voted already? I mean, over half have voted. Now, those that you have not voted, the polls are open. City Hall is the only place you can vote right now. Not in the West Branch, but City Hall in Sun Prairie, downtown, 300 East Main, 7:30 to 5:30 tomorrow. Next week, Monday and Tuesday, 7:30 to 5:30. Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday at 7:30 to 5. You cannot vote ahead of time, early voting after Friday. We used to be able to vote even on Monday, but not anymore. So get out and vote, get that job done. But more importantly, take somebody with you. Call a friend, a neighbor. It's really important. This election means so much. So I really want you to focus on that. And I do have unfortunately, as a politician, I've learned that you can keep talking until they bring the hook out, and I'm not going to do that. Because I want you to hear from someone that I have the greatest respect for in the Assembly. I was fortunate to sit next to Mark Pocan for the last 2 years, and I'll tell you, this guy is so overqualified for the Assembly. Mark has that rare quality of not only being brilliant with numbers and intellect that is next to anyone, but he also is a people person. He can talk with anybody at any level, and he's just a marvelous. I learned so much sitting next to him. I'm going to miss him tremendously, but frankly, he is so overqualified for the Assembly, and he's going to do great in Congress. We have it up and down the ticket. Make sure when you go in and vote, you look at every individual office that's being you're electing, because every one of those is very important. But without further ado, Mark has got a busy schedule, so let's have Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank Nick for running for the county board and working hard enough to get elected, because I started on the county board. And all the human service funding and all the land use policy and all the things that the state kind of allows the local governments to do gets done at that level. And Nick has done a great job on the county board, and we're very lucky to have him serve in Sun Prairie. So thank you again, Nick, for running for county board. Gary, am I ever going to miss sitting next to Gary? You know, I sit next to Gary on the floor, and before that I sat next to Tom Hebl on the floor. There better be a Hebl in some other district in this country, because I don't know if I don't sit next to a Hebl, I'm not sure how I'm going to be on a governmental body. But Gary is a great guy, and he knows Sun Prairie so well, but he is a tremendous legislator. I've been very fortunate to be able to work with him over these years, and it is real important that Gary comes back to the legislature to continue. You know, we need his guidance and leadership, a lot of the new folks coming in, so please do everything you can to help Gary as well as we're looking at November 6th. It's really, really important. I'm really glad to be here. You talked, and you heard Russ talk about all of the many reasons, which I think this group definitely knows why we need to elect the people we need to on November 6th. I really enjoy coming out to SPARC. I was out when you had the Boulevard event. That was a great event. You had a great turnout this summer. You have the Grassroots. We know the people are with us. We know they agree with us on the issues. What we usually don't have is the money. And if you look at this year, the election, there is no question, once again, that's true. In Wisconsin, our U.S. Senate race is the #2 in the country for outside money coming in. And it's generally not for our side, it's for the other side. Carl Rove, as of a couple weeks ago, was up to $3.8 million, and I know that's going to grow, what he's willing to spend against Tammy Baldwin. But we've got the people power. So when we get people to go out and vote early, and we get out, we take that weekend off, and we help on GOTV, and we take Election Day off, most important day to take off of work, or get sick or something. Taking Election Day off is really, really important, because that's where we get the votes out. Because the one thing they can't match us on is getting the votes out. And you heard Russ, who when he talked about being elected by 31 votes, I was a freshman in college here at Madison, and I was a page when we had to move him into that office that January after that special election. I remember when Russ came on board, 31 votes. My dad ran for mayor of Kenosha in 1984. I took a semester off of college to help down there. We lost by, believe it or not, 31 votes out of 22,000 cast. I know what it's like to have really close elections. And in Wisconsin, it's often a few thousand votes decide a statewide election. But you know where the margin comes that makes up for that? Is right here in Dane County. We deliver this. In fact, there was a conservative blogger who wrote an article once about the 4 wards that run Wisconsin. We can really rack up those totals of Democratic votes versus the Republican votes coming out. So it is just so crucial what's coming up, because we know that if the other thing happens, and if the president is not reelected and Governor Romney's elected, it's going to be more trickle down, more tax cuts for billionaires and millionaires, and we won't grow the economy from the middle out and the bottom up. And you know that they're going to repeal the Affordable Care Act. And I'll tell you, when I go around the district, there are more people talk about health care as an issue that relates to their personal life than anything else that comes up. Talked to a woman in Plain who just started a new job. Her health insurance hadn't kicked in. Her baby had a stroke. And had it not been for the Affordable Care Act, she would not have necessarily had health insurance, or at least her and her husband would have had to go bankrupt. Talked to a woman in Westport whose son was 25, got cancer. But because of the Affordable Care Act, he was still under the family policy and had access to health care. And these are the stories that you hear when you go around. So the Republicans, what does Tommy Thompson want to do? What does Mitt Romney want to do? They want to get rid of that. And we just can't go backwards. As Russ said, we need to go farther, but at least we've got something strong in place. And finally, Medicare and Social Security. We all hope that we're going to be there someday for Medicare and Social Security. But if you take that and privatize it and voucherize it and create coupons instead of health care, and that's exactly what they're going to do, we are going to risk so much for so many. So there's a lot on the stake, but what's important is we just need to take that final 4 days off, take Election Day off. Please do everything you can. I would really appreciate your support as I'm running for Congress, but make sure from the top of the ticket down through the county offices, we're getting good progressives elected. Please take the time to do that during the final GOTV weekend. Thanks so much for having me here. I really appreciate it.